Hi you guys, my name is Kat Stabio and I'll be talking to y'all about CSS transitions in this video. So I geeked out a little bit when I started researching what exactly they were because there are some really cool effects that you can create with these transitions. But before we get into the logistics and code of CSS transitions, I wanted to show you an example right off the bat in the hopes that while I'm explaining the different properties and definitions, it will make sense. Because if you were like me at all and had never heard of CSS transitions, you wouldn't even know what to look for. So let's run over here to brackets. And right here off the bat is example 1. So when I hover over this purple square, it grows into a rectangle, which is a pretty cool transition. And then when I come down here to this blue square, it's really cool because it not only changes its position, but it changes its color as well. See how, I'll do it again, you can see how it rotates, which makes for a pretty cool effect. I mean, there are some really neat things that we can do with these transitions. So before we look at more examples, let's talk about what a CSS transition actually is and how to use it. So CSS transitions allow you to change property values smoothly over a given duration. So to create that transition, you need to first obviously choose which CSS property you want to add an effect to, meaning a paragraph or an image, a header, what have you, and then specify the duration of the effect. And make sure you always specify an amount of time or your transition will never work. Okay, so let's move on to all the properties. These ones here are the 5 that you can use. There aren't any more. You need to use one of these 5. And each one is pretty self-explanatory, but I'll explain them anyway, and then I'll show you an example of each one. So I'm going to skip this first transition and explain that one better at the end because it's more of a container. So let's move on to the transition property. And this is going to specify the name of the CSS property the transition effect is for. So let me show you an example quick as we move forward. So right here I've got this div1. Oh, sorry, that's in my, here we go. So right here, this div1 we're working with transition property. So right here I've set the width at 2 seconds, and when I come over here to our Chrome, when I hover over here, as you can see, it's changing the width of the rectangle, which is pretty cool. Let's see what happens when we change the width to height. So now it's changing and going up and down instead of across. And if I wanted to, I could even add the width back in. Oops, that's not going to work. I could add the width back in, and let me show you what happens there. So now the height and the width are working together to create a bigger square, which is pretty neat. Okay, so the next transition is transition delay. And maybe you don't want the transition to take place immediately, so you add a delay telling the CSS property to wait before completing the task. But it's really important to note that the delay works in seconds, and that's the amount of time that you can use, or the measure of time. So let's go back to our examples here in brackets. That's going to be in our div number 2 box. Here's that transition delay. Right now, when I come over and I click on the box, there is no delay because I haven't set any. But when I come over here, let's give it a delay of 2 seconds. When I come back over here, nothing, and there we go. 2 seconds later, it's going to come in, which is really cool. All right. Let's move on to transition duration, which is pretty self-explanatory, but one extra thing to note is that the duration can be done in seconds or milliseconds. So we're going to have this duration be 3 seconds long. Step back over here, and that way you can see it that way. So 3 seconds right here under the transition duration. There we go, we've got our 3 seconds. So you might be wondering, as I was, what happens if you give it a larger number of seconds? Does it ever stop or bleed off the page? So let's see what happens if we give 10 seconds. So as you can see, because we set the width, the box will not exceed 300 pixels. It will just take 10 seconds to get there, which is obviously a lot slower than when we had the 3 seconds. So now we're moving on to transition timing function. So this one's a little bit trickier with a lot more options. Essentially, it specifies the speed curve of the transition effect. So within this property, there are 6 values, and with each value, I have a picture here. So we have the ease, where you can see that it kind of starts out a little quicker with a big rush and slows down at the very end. Then we have linear, which you can see just stays the same speed. Ease in is obviously a slower start with a faster finish, with ease out being a faster start and a slower finish. And then ease in out combines the slower part of those two. So a slow start with a slow finish. And lastly, this cubic Bezier right here, that just allows you to adjust the speed accordingly. So let's take a look at some of the examples in an actual HTML document. Those will be right here in yellow. And so just as I explained before, the linear right here, it's just the same speed. Here's your ease in, ease out, and then your ease in and out, which is really cool. Okay, so let's go back and talk about this transition property again. So this is basically just a way to simplify things. If you don't wish to use all of the separate properties that I mentioned, you can just put them all into this transition container. So let's go check out this example. I have this one in the div 4. So as you can see here, I've set the width as 2 seconds, the height as 2 seconds, and I've used an ease in transition timing function. And I've done all of this within the transition property. So I could have used the duration and property and transition timing function elements all separately, but I left it like this to show you how much it shortens your CSS. And so now you can see in this example, it completes the tasks all the same. Ease in, a width and a height. Oh, sorry, it was kind of cut off there, but now you can see. There we go. So now that you've seen some examples and learned a little bit more on the background, let me answer some questions that you might be having. These are at least the questions that I found myself asking. So first of all, I wanted to know if I always had to do something to get a transition to work, and the answer is yes. Transitions do not start automatically with a page reload. You do have to you do have to trigger the transition to start. So usually this is by hovering over it with your mouse. My second question was if a transition can loop, and the answer to that is no. It can repeat what it was supposed to do, but that requires it to go in reverse. So let's go back here so I can show you an example of that. In this transition duration, oh, that's right, we had it at 10 seconds. And then when we take the mouse off, it's just going to reverse back. And then if you want it to go again, you're just going to have to hover over the element one more time. And lastly, I was wondering why you would ever want or need to use transitions in the first place. So besides the fact that they obviously look really cool, these transitions can make a website more interactive and user-friendly. I'm hoping that while you were watching this presentation, the ideas started to flow in your minds, and that you could start to have an idea of how to use these types of transitions in your own websites. You can do things to your site like have your headers change colors or shrink, or you can also have certain boxes of text rotate or have an inset border. I mean, the possibilities are really endless with these transitions. So I hope that this presentation has inspired you to maybe use one or two in your own weather websites. And if you have any questions, please ask, and I will absolutely do my best to answer them. And I hope y'all have fun tinkering with these transitions.